Good afternoon, Chair.
Hi, Darius.
How are you doing?
Can you hear me, Darius?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can.
All right.
Great. Thanks.
All right.
I saw a weird message pop up on my screen and so I was like, I don't know what that means.
All right. Well, I most of this is going to be the open meetings stuff, but we'll wait for Kathy Young to get on. But otherwise, I don't know how long that will take, but I think based on your message, I think we should be okay. And we can also assign a temporary chair with the board's consent as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just have interestingly, another transportation thing to go do. And I thought the time was later than it is, so it starts at 4:30. So if I leave by 4, I should be able to get there.
Okay. Nope. Sounds good.
Thank you.
We do have a quorum as of now,
Okay, I
but however long you want to wait for other members of the board to get on.
think we'll get started.
Okay.
That's okay with everyone. Well, welcome everyone. This is, I call the meeting for the uh, Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise Board to order, and I'll ask Darius to do the roll call.
Yes. Director Suniga is excused. She may make it, but she has an event in Pueblo today. Director Wheeler,
Present.
Director Stockinger,
Here.
Director Furco,
Here.
Vice Chair Baca, and Director Holguin and Chair Stevens.
Here.
We do have a quorum, Chair.
Okay. We do have a quorum, so we will open for public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to give public comment? Please raise your hand or indicate otherwise. Darius, have you heard from anyone who wanted to give public comment today?
We have not gotten any messages, no.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so we will close public comment and we will move on to our next item, which is approval of the minutes for the July 25th, 2024 Board of Directors meeting. I would entertain a motion for that item.
So moved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Baca, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
You have one abstention, Madam Chair. I was not
Okay.
present at the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Director Wheeler. We'll have, so I think that came out to be then 4 ayes, 0 noes, and 1 abstention. So we will move on to our next item, which is our open meetings training. I do want to tell board members that I have to leave at 4, so I'm hoping Lynn will be on to run the rest of the meeting if we run after that, and if not, we can appoint someone to be the acting chair. I apologize, but I have another meeting. So we will turn it over now, though, to Kathy Young from the Attorney General's office for our required annual open meetings training.
Chair, if I could,
Uh-huh.
I do want to mention that Director Holguin and Vice Chair Baca are here, but I do not see Kathy Young yet, so we may go to the back of the agenda and then we'll circle back.
Okay. So do you want to go to the allocation of NAAPME funds or?
Yes, we can start there
Okay.
if you like.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. Thank you, members of the board. As you know, we've been working hard on trying to get the notice of funding opportunity for the small grant program done before the requested deadline by the board of September 30th. And I think we're very close in agenda, the Attachment A, Appendix A in the packet, has the full NOFO for review. If you have any comments or suggestions, myself or Phil Von Hake, who's working on this, can take those and incorporate those in there. So we have covered fairly extensively, you know, the background information, the timelines, funding available, eligibility, responsibility of project sponsors, and been working on the appendices of this, in particular assistance with how to use the emission reduction calculators as part of the CMAQ. So that way grantees can report back their emission reduction benefits, how they're able to evaluate disproportionately impacted communities, and be able to provide that information to the board as part of their application packet using the EnviroScreen tool. We had two presentations, one on the EnviroScreen tool and one on a proposed Teams tool that's still in the works as of right now, still in kind of the beta phase. So we're not quite there using it. But since it uses EnviroScreen, that is more general for disproportionately impacted communities and isn't solely focused on transportation, but is still a great tool and does inform the Teams tool. So we have information on that, and especially to reference them back to some of the more extensive guidance on those websites. The one thing that we are missing is, of course, invoicing, which we will have for next meeting, which will be a sample invoice and instructions on how to invoice to make sure that they're in compliance with state statute. And that will complete the potential notice of the NOFO, and we'll have it available for a potential action by the board. If the board takes action next month, we will put it out on, quote unquote, out on the street, do a press conference, make sure we have everything ready for that, which includes notifying local partners through working with CDOT's extensive network of local governments that they have compiled through the years through our Office of Policy and Government Relations, and of course putting it on the website as well, and be taking applications throughout the winter and spring timeframe. So I think I've already covered this on the slide. I kind of talked without moving the slides forward, so my apologies. But that's kind of where we're at right now with the NOFO. Just as a reminder, we have allocated, I believe, $18.25 million for this initial NOFO, which is to use any of the programming funds from the years that are currently in, that have passed. So some of the roll forward funds for this potential grant, and grantees can request all of the funds if available, but it's up to the board to make those allocations of how much they want to grant to how those come in, and staff will be on hand for assistance on evaluation and being able to bring those forward. So expect those at a future meeting. With that, I'll open to any questions board members have regarding the NOFO or any suggestions as well.
Questions? Director Stockinger.
Thanks. Yeah, not so much a question, but I just want to make a comment. And I'm looking at page 60 of the overall packet. And I like that. Let's see if I can, I just skip the page. Yeah, page 60, the 25% for disproportionately impacted communities. You've clearly heard us when we talked about kind of, we want you to engage in the community and with the community. And you have a couple of those kind of sub questions that would generate that 25% about, what was done to engage with the community. And I think I appreciate you all being very responsive to our goals on that. That's it for me.
Absolutely happy to do so. And in fact, we wanted to make sure that since the board had mentioned that outreach to disproportionately impacted communities as a top priority, we want to make that a top priority in addition to reducing ozone. So those should take up like 50% of the score.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, I was also really glad to see that was that was given equal weight with regard to the amount of ozone reduction. So that was something that the board clearly wanted. Also appreciate the just engagement piece. We had said we didn't want to just check a box, and so the folks who are applying really have to explain what they did. Director Holguin, please.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I also want to just say thank you really appreciate having the question of 2D, to what degree this impact will improve economic opportunities for disproportionately impacted communities. So really appreciate adding that in.
Absolutely.
Director Furco?
Yeah, I also just wanted to jump in. It's very exciting to kind of see this physical product after many months of talking about what we want it to look like. So just echoing that gratitude. And I don't have any actionable feedback, but just also recognizing that once we get this out there, we might get some lessons learned that we'll want to apply, and just recognizing that.
Absolutely. If there's anything that we had missed as far as staff goes, we would probably want to recognize that for the next round. And also in talking about our larger grant program for items like BRT, that will be probably a next item of discussion after, probably at the September meeting, maybe after, but wanting to bring that up forward on the agenda as well. And I do want to mention, if I could, Chair, I do want to give a lot of credit to staff, not me in particular, but to the staff who worked on it, Phil Ball and Hank, for doing most of the legwork and getting this ready for us.
Yeah, I think it looks great. So we decided, I guess, that we weren't going to have a maximum amount, that they could apply for the entire amount if they wanted to, but it needed to be at least $500,000. Okay. And then with regard to outreach, so you talked about, was there any specific outreach we were going to do to, disadvantaged communities that we're aware of that might have projects in the pipeline? What did it look like to maybe do some targeted outreach? Do we have anything in the plan?
I think we do have some of that, using some of the networks that we're already engaged with some of the other efforts that we can borrow from the Colorado Department of Transportation, some of the efforts that we're engaged with, the greenhouse gas planning standard, the House Bill 1101 study that happened recently, and then like our contacts with all the municipalities without. I was going to say statewide, it's not statewide. We have it for statewide, but within the non-attainment area. So being able to help get the message out and through email blasts, and we'll try to work with our Department of Communications, CDOT's Department of Communications, in order to see what we can do as far as a press release, in order to have that out there as well, not in other languages, in Spanish in particular as well, to make sure that it is accessible when we have it on our website. So that's some of the things that we're going to take a look at. And also we can take a look at some of the stuff that was developed. I know it's been a while, but 2 years ago when we did our own public outreach and used some of the lists that were developed there.
That's great. I know you guys are doing a lot more equity work now too, so you probably have a lot more connections that you've built through some of the work that Marcia's done and stuff. So
absolutely.
Excellent. Any other questions on this topic for Darius? We're going to see it one more time, right?
You are going to see it one more time
in September. So if you didn't get a question in, or you have some concerns or something like that, know that you can obviously always email Darius, but also that we'll get one more look at it in September before we roll it out.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Well, it looks like Kathy is here, and she has the fun job of reminding us how to stay in line and best practices for our meetings and open meeting laws. So Kathy, we'll let you take over now. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. And then I will ask whoever is running the slideshow, I'll just ask to move slides. I appreciate that. And there's a few of you who've seen this at least once or maybe even a second time. And unfortunately, it's going to look very familiar because I've been training several of CDOT's and CDOT enterprise boards the last couple weeks. So just want to point out on this, my email is on this front slide, and please will offer to to anyone, if you have a question about any of the topics I discussed, don't hesitate to shoot me an email and we can get on the phone and talk about it further. And there might be a little time at the end for questions, but I'll try to keep us on schedule. So next slide, please. The reason we are doing this training, because first of all, it's a good idea, but it also is a legal requirement. There's the statute that tells us that we need to do this training annually on several issues. Some don't apply to this board, but understanding statutory powers and duties, identifying and managing conflicts of interest, and also understanding Colorado's Open Records Act and open meetings laws. Next slide. So I've outlined here the non-attainment board's business purpose, and it really is it's always good for me just to read, what's the business purpose of the board. Again, I'm happy to send anyone a copy of statutes if you'd like, but just every year, just to refresh your understanding, why are you here? The board is taking time out of busy schedules to serve on this board, and just to understand, what is the business purpose. So I've just cut and pasted right there. Next slide. The board powers and duties is outlined there. Adopt bylaws, things that we might not ever end up doing, but you never know. You have the ability to hold title and dispose of real property. You can supervise individuals. You can hire consultants and contractors. The big one, obviously, is providing grants. And something, you are an enterprise. Something an enterprise to even be a valid Tabor exempt enterprise is to be able to issue debts. And that if you didn't have that ability, you wouldn't be a valid Tabor exempt enterprise. Next slide. One of the issues to train on is conflicts of interest. Because this board is a volunteer board, I don't know that you get any compensation for it. It's pretty limited in state statute what you can't do. And really the only prohibition is that you shall not perform an official act which may have a direct economic benefit on a business or other undertaking in which such member has a direct or substantial financial interest. The second column there's actually a process that you could still vote on a matter, even if you had a direct conflict of interest, if you disclose it to the Secretary of State. I mean, that just never happens, but just something good to know. And on this, it really is narrow. And I would say, please ask me, we're happy to discuss. If we do think that this is going to arise, we'll discuss. And probably the decision we'll come to is that you'll just abstain from voting on something. I think a clear or just an example is if you are an employee of an entity that's going to get a grant from the enterprise, I would say on that one, probably will have you abstain from voting on that. But it really just doesn't come up much. Sometimes it's really more of just a perceived conflict of interest. And that's one that we can talk about. And again, maybe the decision will be that you'll abstain. But it really is pretty narrow and just doesn't come up a whole lot, but something to be aware of. Next slide.
I feel like that could come up with the grant cycle happening, so
right.
That's I would think that's the most likely place because we're all, representing kind of different entities. So if that does come up then, or like once we see what grantees are there and stuff like that, maybe should we individually have conversations with you about that?
I would say, yeah, why don't you just reach out? And I know I just got a question about an employee of Boulder, City of Boulder, I believe. But the group he worked at the City of Boulder had nothing to do with where the grant was going. And so we came to the decision that he didn't even need to abstain from that. So I think it's, it really is pretty narrow language, right? You need to have a direct benefit. I think you could argue you're not even having a direct benefit, by receiving the grant, but it's one of those, just the perception maybe will decide that it's best to abstain. But again, fact specific. So on that, and thank you for pointing that out. It really, I would feel better just hearing the facts and then advising on that. So this is a new slide, one that I don't think I mentioned last year, but I did want to point out the amendment. I'm sure people remember. It was quite a while ago now, but Amendment 41, the voters passed that into the Colorado Constitution. And it does apply to you as board members of a state board. And it really is a gift ban. And it's just one that I wanted to just flag. Again, I just don't know that it comes up much, but if you're offered an opportunity to travel to in your role, of course, as a board member, we'll just need to talk about whether you can accept that or if it is banned by Amendment 41. Amendment 41 also says you're not supposed to accept, it's up to $75 a year now. So if someone's treating you to lunch in your role as a board member of this board, you can, it's whether, if you feel comfortable or not, but you do have that allowance of $75 a year. The website I featured at the bottom there is actually a really interesting website. There is, as part of Amendment 41, the Independent Ethics Commission was established. And they really do a good job, and their website is up to date and very easy to search by words. And so they have a history of all of their opinions and letter rulings they've given. There's quite a few that are geared towards elected officials, which have some guidance for board members, but just I spent some time on it not so long ago and was really impressed at just really how easy it is to and just wanted to flag that it exists, and that's the website. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to move into talking about open records. And so open records, and this is the Colorado Open Records Act. And then it's always good to just start from what the underlying premise is the legislature has declared that all public records shall be open for inspection by any person at reasonable times, except, and then that's when you get into the pages and pages of the open records law that give you the exceptions and things like that. But I need to remind myself sometimes that, really just starting from the place where it's an open record and then deciding if it's one that we can withhold or need to withhold sometimes helps me with the analysis. So next slide, please. Again, very broad, and there is something important is it's not limited to just paper documents. I mean, it's more so in this day and age, it's electronic documents. Emails are going to be public records. I mean, emails, and I'll just gear it towards this board. We get very few open records requests for board member records, but we do on occasion get a request. We would just ask you to gather documents and send them, and then CDOT has an open records custodian, Andrew Hogel, and then he works with the Attorney General's office, my unit, often. And so you never would have to be the individual that would go through records and decide if they were disclosable or privileged, things like that. Someone else would take on that task. So our request for board members is please, if you get a request and you have emails, You might not have them because your process for retaining them is you retain them for 3 months and then they drop off. I would say just to continue to utilize your own process. But if you have a document and you think it's responsive, then we would ask that you just send it. Sometimes we set up Google Drives, ways for you to deposit the records, and then we would take it from there. Text messages, I get that question often. If it is a phone that has been provided by the state, there's a very good chance the text message would be considered a public record. And it's just if it's your private phone, the answer is probably it depends. I think we would push back initially on text messages from private phones, but you know, you never know. We sure don't want to be the first case that a judge tells us we need to turn over those text messages. So again, advice, and this is, we have a sophisticated board here. I probably don't even need to give this advice, but just always keep your communications privilege or professional, and we usually won't have an issue. So next slide, please. So like I said, you start from the premise that it's a public document, but then you have to look at all of the ways that we can deny inspection. And there's a lot of them. So, you know, and I just, you know, is it contrary to public interest? We don't turn over security arrangements. We don't turn over trade secrets, employment records. We almost never turn over. So, again, someone else will do the analysis about whether we can withhold them. Just that last bullet's interesting. There's a whole category of documents that the legislature has decided to say, you know what, these aren't even public. So you don't even have to do the analysis. One of them that is interesting is work product prepared for elected officials. The legislature has said those are actually just simply not public records. So that, you know, could come up. It has actually come up, you know, a little bit over the years. And we would just withhold. So next slide, please. An issue to know about for open records, and just as citizens to know about, is the legislature has given a very short turnaround time for open records, and they have deemed that a reasonable time is 3 working days or less. And then there's another place where you can, though, assert, I started to say claim, but assert that there's extenuating circumstances, and you get another 7 working days. And I can tell you, it is hard to find records sometimes, and CDOT very often does take advantage of the additional 7 working days. But even those 2 time periods added together is just not a lot of time. And so when you get you know, when there's a CORA request, you need to just get on it really, really fast. If the requester has asked for a single document, we can't say there's extenuating circumstances. You need to get the record, and you need to respond to the request within 3 working days or less. Next slide. And so this just kind of a catch-all on some CORA, and then we'll move on to open meetings. The interesting thing, it's actually a couple years old now, but the legislature, I think courts were getting tired of all of the open records litigation that was going on. And so the legislature has created a 14-day cooling off period. And so the requester, if they feel like they have not been provided with all of the documents that exist before they can file a lawsuit, you have to cool off for 14 days. And so in reality, that gives the state agency even more time to be trying to find records. And while we're discussing and cooling off, and then after that period, the requester can go to court and ask the court for an order. And a really important thing there is that they might be awarded attorney fees and costs, and it's just not something the government ever wants to have to pay. And so there's a bit of a race to the courthouse with open records. And we have CDOT has done it one time where you really have a very sincere belief that while a record exists, it's not one that you have to turn over. And so the government, the custodian, can go to court first and ask for the court to review in camera and issue an order. And if you do that, there's a very good chance that attorney's fees will not be awarded if you do that. So there's some strategy involved. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to open meetings. Again, like open records, it is a policy of the state that the formation of public policy is and public business, it needs to not be conducted in secret. It needs to be conducted in out in the open. And the reasoning behind that, it gives citizens an opportunity to be fully informed. And then also, what we're doing here in this board meeting is making legislative decisions, and it also, gives citizens the ability to participate in the legislative process. Next slide. So a meeting is a gathering convened to discuss public business, and that is where the rub is on open meetings is, where we gathered to just learn about something that will benefit us in this role on the non-attainment board, or was it really a gathering and we were discussing public business? But it is broad. You can create a meeting by email. If you really are going back and forth and discussing public business, then you probably have a meeting through that email communication. And so I'll just go through the rules of what you do for a meeting. Next slide. So I know several of you are coming from local government, and I'll just flag that the open meetings laws for state agencies are just different enough from local bodies that it could be confusing. And so just remember, I'm not an expert on local governments, but for the state, 2 or more of the public body is a meeting, is flat out a meeting. If 2 of you are gathered and you are discussing public business, then you've created a meeting. And that's okay. Really, we need to analyze, is that a meeting that we should have noticed? Because creating a meeting is okay. What we need to do, though, is capture that in minutes. But what we don't want to do is have a meeting that we should have noticed for 24 hours before. So I don't want to tell people to not gather. I think it's fairly common I can just speak for transportation commissioners, for a couple commissioners to be at CDOT meeting with a few CDOT employees on something. But chances are that is a meeting, and we should, and we do. We even just a sentence in the meetings, I believe we had a meeting, and it is reflected in the minutes. So again, public business is pretty fact specific, but courts look to the policymaking responsibilities to decide, are you talking about something that is the business of this particular board? Next slide. I think I am probably a little more, I'd like to think on the practical side about what is and isn't a meeting. Chance meetings, seeing somebody at the grocery store, I'm just not going to say you created a meeting. I guess I would advise, please don't get really into the weeds of board business while you're chatting, but social gatherings, other events, and there's a chance that you'll get invited to go to a conference and learn about a topic. And I would say that the business of that board or that conference is not the business of the non-attainment enterprise. and you sitting there at that conference, you just haven't created a meeting. Next slide. But again, meetings must be, okay, this slide, I can improve on this slide. Not all meetings have to be noticed, but if you have a quorum, if you have a majority of the board, then you need to notice it. And, or if even if it's not a quorum, but you are really kind of crossing that line and you're going to adopt, well, you really can't adopt a policy without having a quorum, but you know, you're really coming up with you know, the policy of the board, you're making decisions, then it needs to be noticed, and that you need to do that by posting on the website no later than no less than 24 hours prior to the meeting. And there's some ways that you can try to correct it if we did somehow end up with a meeting that we didn't notice, which, I mean, you don't want to do, but you know, what we would do is we would just try to correct it. We would notice a correct meeting and we would try to do it all over again. Next slide. And then minutes are also just an absolute requirement for all meetings, even ones that weren't noticed. Next slide. And so executive session is an exception that the legislature has given for open meetings laws. And it is a tool that's available. And I don't think this board it takes, you know, overuses it at all. And I just would say, you know, if it's something that, if we need to go into executive session, it's absolutely something that's legal. The just important thing to know about executive sessions, well, there's several important things, but you have to follow very precise steps to validly go into an executive session. You have to have a supermajority. You have to have 2/3 of the board vote to go into executive session. It has to be recorded, and you have to keep that recording for 90 days. Next slide. And there's also limited reasons you can go into executive session, and I've outlined most of them here. I think there's probably a few. Attorney advice is one that is you know, fairly, we use that fairly often. And I'm trying to think of an example of another reason for executive session, and there very well might be one for this board to go into, but well, you know, sometimes we have active procurements, and we need to talk about proposals, and those proposals really will turn over proprietary information. And I know the Transportation Commission has gone in to executive session on occasion for those types of matters. Next slide. And you really just, we've had some kind of bad cases lately about executive sessions. And it really, as far as I can tell, has been that they just went too far. They had grounds and then they got into an executive session. I don't know how people knew about it, but they just talked about things they shouldn't. You know, and so we have had a couple cases where the courts have said, yeah, this wasn't a valid executive session. And then, you know, what happens is the recording ends up being made public. And the person that sued probably got their attorney's fees and court costs and things like that. Next slide. So I think this might be my last slide, but generally it's interesting. Courts have been pretty harsh on failure to disclose open records, and fairly lenient on if you had a misstep on an open meeting. But I think the tide might be changing a little because we've just had some sort of bad open meetings lately. One of the tools I have used is the concept of ratification. That if you really did, and I mean, you sure don't want to do this often, but one time we thought maybe we had not validly adopted something. And so we went back and did it again, and we ratified our decision. Well, the Colorado Supreme Court has actually accepted a case on ratification. And I'm like, oh my gosh, are they gonna tell us we can't do that? But we'll see. Again, sort of really bad facts. They say bad facts make bad case law, but I have always thought it was a reasonable tool, and so that's one that I know my office is tracking. So next slide, please. I think that'll be, yep. So great. So I think we have a few minutes if there's any questions, or again, shoot me an email. Happy to talk about any of this further.
Are there any questions that anyone has? I don't see any questions. Kathy, I have just, well, a couple questions. When you said to go into executive session, we need 2/3 of the board. That's 2/3 of the board, not 2/3 of the folks
Yeah.
that are here. So
Yes.
in a case like where we had a, light attendance, we probably wouldn't be able to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, no. And that's where you just have to, I mean,
Think in
you,
advance about that.
right. You need to know who's going to be. I mean, it used to be you had to be sitting there in person, right? And we had a couple times where we just didn't get it. I mean, virtual makes it a little bit easier, but yeah, you have to have that 2/3.
And then with one last question, then I'll let Director Furco go. But when with like a core request, I take a lot of notes during a meeting. Are those subject to, I assume I just kind of dump them in a file and then but are those subject to core requests too?
They are, right? Any
Okay.
writing. I mean, we would look at it to see if they were drafts, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna sound like I'm being you don't want to be too sneaky about things, but we would ask, just please submit them to us and then we'll take a look. But yeah,
Okay.
no, that's a good question. It absolutely, Cora is broad enough to capture those. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Director Furco.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Kathy. I was wondering if you could expand a little more on a situation in which we'd want to use executive session when reviewing like a potential application. I think I got a little lost there. I just want to clarify.
Yeah. There is this concept of deliberative process.
Mhm.
And so we have, I'll try not to get too in the weeds, and this is something I've dealt with for a lot of years, but if you don't have to turn something over in an open records request, and deliberative process is an exception to open records, then why would you have to turn it over in an open meeting? So there has been you harmonize the two statutes. So there is support that you can go into executive session for things that you just can keep confidential. And then you also can go into executive session if you're talking about proprietary or trade secret information. And we just would have to analyze, if a government entity or a nonprofit submits a grant application, I don't know. I don't know if that's enough to say, but I think if you're deliberating about who to hand out grants to, that might be a reason we can go into an executive session. I mean, I'd want to think about it more, but I mean, we don't want to overuse it, but if you really need to have a frank discussion, that, maybe you definitely, if you were looking for, say the board wants to hire a vendor for something and you want to talk about their proposal, but it's just not a public document yet. I do think you could go in. I mean, the thing is it might become a public document, as definitely if you end up awarding them, that their proposal is going to be a public document. But if you don't end up giving them the contract, their pricing, things like that, that's just, I think we could say it's proprietary, and we're just, at the moment you need to go into executive session for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That may kind of, we can probably think about that as we're thinking about going into a grant process of what that might look like if we have a subcommittee to do that, or if we have staff kind of do the first round, or, you know, what that might look like. Just because, yeah, I think it would be helpful to kind of
Yeah, no,
have,
I'm
think in
happy.
advance about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah,
else?
and I
for
saw
Kathy?
Commissioner Wheeler's comments. So yep, I agree.
Anything else for Kathy? I think we're
Okay.
good, Kathy. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and reminding us, you know, I think this group is pretty good in that way, but it's always good to have a reminder of about the rules. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.
All right, Darius, where are we?
We are, if I can get to you are seeing the presentation still. My computer had a hiccup there.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
All right, we're right here. Enterprise and budget and program updates.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Go ahead with that.
This is attachment B in the packet. This is an update with the budget, and I may ask the financial specialist. I think this is at the end of fiscal year 24 on potential collections that have happened, which the enterprise collected in its various fees around 10.9 million, which was ahead of what the estimate is by about a few $100,000. I don't think it was pretty spot on there. And the enterprise, most of the expenses have come from staff salaries more so than Department of Law legal support than from any of the other pieces. So, but everything's in line with that. And of course, any unused administration rolls into programming fund with the next fiscal year. Want to note that in October, we'll be taking a look at the FY26 budget, and we also will do some roll forwards and reconciliation with the FY25 budget, FY24 with making the books all add up, knowing that as we have seen these past couple of years, the enterprise, not just this one, but many of the enterprises tend to collect more funds than the original estimates. So that is in attachment B. And then finally, this is a draft outline of the future board of directors meeting, as we had stated, probably on the 26th, if the board would like, and is good with the NOFO, the board can approve it and authorize the call, which we can start on September 30th. And I think I had this conversation with somebody earlier. I think that is not a Saturday, but we'll do it on the next business day if it is. And then we'll provide the board updates as that process goes through until we get to the process of selection. The draft fiscal year 25, should say 26, I apologize, 26 budget will be up for review and comment with the final budget to be approved in February. There is no board meeting in November, and then the December 5th board meeting before we have Christmas is to wrap up the board's business for this calendar year and do the annual report, which goes to the Transportation Commission and to the Transportation Committees of note in the legislature. And that's our basic schedule, but of course we can add things on as they come up. And I think that's all that we had for this topic. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions around the budget or the future board meetings? No, looks like it looks good. Well, I'm excited. We're getting closer to getting the grant funding out. It's fun to see it on the calendar. So that's great. All right. So it looks like we're going to finish early, giving back some time. Everybody's happy about that. So I adjourn this meeting, and we will see you all next month for that last look at that. I'm hearing an echo. For the last look at our the NOFO before that goes out. So very exciting. All right. Take care, everyone. Good to see you all.
Have a great
Thanks,
holiday.
everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks.